We're going to dive into our series that we've been in Nehemiah. And we've been in this I Am series, taking control of identity. All right, a couple of things right off the bat. I've been explaining to you, Pastor Mike has been explaining to you, Pastor Dave has been explaining to you that the identity that God has created you in, the image that God's created you, and the identity that the world wants to throw at you will always be different and they will always clash. You have to realize that, all right? As we're talking about this I Am cycle, now, when we say I am, when we talk about I am, that represents your identity, right? When you say I am a man, I am a woman, I am teacher, firefighter, whatever, business owner, whatever you're identifying as, your I am, that is what we're going to be talking about. So real quick, let me run you through the I am cycle just to catch anybody up that's missed the past few weeks. So your I am, your identity, is going to establish and inform your truth, okay? Your I am, your identity is going to speak to and establish your truth, your internal truth, which is your reality, okay? Your truth is your reality. Now, some of you remember me saying a few weeks ago that your reality, your truth, might be different than God's reality, God's truth. That's gonna be up to you. It's going to be up to you to accept God's truth because God's truth is the truth. Somebody say amen. But it's going to be up to you to decide to accept God's reality and God's truth. So your I am, your identity, is going to establish your truth, which is your reality, okay? Your truth is then going to establish your thinking, right? If it's your identity and then it becomes your truth, which is your reality, your thinking starts to follow. And then if you think about something long enough, you're processing the world this way. I've been living this way for 50 years, for 20 years, whatever. This is the way I see the world. This is the way I see God. This is the way I see myself. Your thinking becomes your actions. All right? It's not long before your actions follow your thinking. And then when those actions are done over and over and over again, it gets to a point where you don't even have to think about that action. It becomes a habit, right? A habit is something that is routine for you. You don't have to think about it. For instance, you woke up this morning and you brushed your teeth. I hope. That's a habit, right? It's not something you think about. You don't go to sleep the night before thinking, look at my calendar, see if I have to brush my teeth tomorrow. It's just a habit. It's part of your everyday routine, right? So these habits then further solidify, they loop back around, further solidify your I am, your identity. Because the longer these habits begin to solidify, that loops back around and it's, well, this is who I am because this is what I do. And then the whole cycle just keeps going and going and going and going. Then the question is raised, what if my I am cycle is not a healthy one? What if it's not a good one? What if it's not a good habit like brushing my teeth? What if it's something that's harmful for me? What if my I am cycle keeps going and going and going, but it's not a good one? I want to tell you that the God that I serve is a powerful God. Somebody say amen. The God that I serve is able to interrupt your current reality and take you to a new I am cycle. And that's what we've been talking about over the past few weeks. This idea in the book of Nehemiah where we noted a few things about Nehemiah. In chapter 1, we noted that he was born into captivity. He was born into captivity. He's one of God's chosen people, one of the Israelites, but the Israelites are in exile. So this beautiful land of Jerusalem where God's chosen people are supposed to be living and flourishing and worshiping, it's not so for them, right? So some of them have been taken and thrown into slavery. Others who've kind of escaped the whole slavery route are settling back in Jerusalem, but it's in ruins. The walls have been burned with fire, and it's not good, right? So we learn in chapter 1 that Nehemiah was born into captivity, right? So everything around him, his whole society was telling him, you're just a servant, you're less than, you don't get to talk. It was just rough for him, right? But now, at least at that point, he could hold on to the thought of, but my ancestry, I'm one of God's chosen people, and this beautiful land of Jerusalem that maybe someday I'll get to lay eyes on. He could at least hold on to that. But we learn toward the end of, or middle end of chapter 1 that he gets news that it's in ruins, that it's messed up. And so now every part of Nehemiah is crushed. He's sad because his whole identity now feels like it's hanging in the balance. Then we get to chapter 2. In chapter 2, we see that he's presented with the perfect opportunity, the right place, the right time, the right atmosphere to ask the king, can I go and rebuild the walls in Jerusalem? Can I go? I believe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. He takes God up on it. He starts walking out on the promises of God, that God's called him to do this thing, right? Then we get toward the end of chapter 2, and we see that he is surveying the wall. He is inspecting the wall, seeing where the issues are, seeing where the integrity might be weak in the wall, seeing where the enemy's getting in, all these things. He begins talking with the leaders and the workers, the people that will be doing the work on the wall with him. He identifies with them. He's saying, we are in deep trouble here. Now, let me remind you, Nehemiah was born in captivity. He had nothing to do with the wall. He had nothing to do with it being burned with fire, yet he still identifies with them and says, hey, look, we're all in this together, right? This is where we pick up, okay? But I gotta ask the question, because at this point, Nehemiah has accepted the call of God. He has rejected the I am that society has put on him. You're no more than a servant. You were born to serve the king, nothing more. Just do your job, be quiet, right? He's rejected that I am, and he's stepped into the I am, the identity that God has given him, which is, hey, I've called you to go and rebuild the walls in Jerusalem. He's begun stepping into that. So my question that we're going to answer today is, what happens when you accept the call of God? What happens when you accept the identity of God? And as you are accepting the identity of God, now the opposition that you face is no longer just internal dialogue between you and God. It's no longer just the voices in your head, self-talk or self-doubt. It's no longer just the enemy whispering things in your ear. What happens when the opposition is standing in front of you? It's the person that you work with. It's the person that you, hopefully not, but go to church with, right? The person that is maybe in your family, right? What happens when the opposition is right in front of you? That's where we pick up today. Nehemiah at the end of chapter 2. So he had just got done surveying the wall, talking to the leaders. They're drawing up plans, right? At the end of chapter 2, at the end of verse 18, they replied, let us start rebuilding. They is the people that Nehemiah was there talking to, the crew that he was going to be working with. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. They're talking about this great work that's about to happen. Okay, cool. Let's get going. Verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you are doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? Look, family, when you decide to take God up at his word, when you decide to step into the identity that God has called you to be, people are going to label you a bad person. The world is going to label you a bad person. Why, Pastor? Let me tell you why. The reason is because you are doing things that are different than their norm. You're doing things that are sometimes opposite of what they are doing. And because you are opposite of what the world is doing, the world will label you their enemy, i.e. a bad person, right? And in this specific instance, they are saying, you're a bad person, Nehemiah. You are a rebel. They're looking at him and they're saying, what are you doing? You're just doing this because you want to rebel against the king. When you're walking into the identity that God has called you into, people will sometimes label you a rebel. They'll say, you're just trying to kick up dust. You're just trying to cause problems. You're just doing too much. You're being extra. Anybody ever heard that one? You just being extra, right? I can remember growing up and my family we were different. For a lot of different reasons, we were just different. But I want to tell you two of them. One of them was a stand that my father took. Anybody know Pokemon? Anybody know Pokemon? Okay, all right. My dad had watched a sermon, and the pastor, I don't even know the name of the pastor, I don't even know the sermon, but the pastor had said in his sermon that Pokemon, translated in Japanese, means pocket monster, right? And so my dad then was like, well, that must mean demon collector, because if you've got monsters in your pockets, you're collecting demons, right? He's like, we're not collecting any demons in this house of mine, right? So we were that family. We weren't allowed to watch Pokemon. We weren't allowed to play with the cards or any of that stuff. And, there's mixed feelings, mixed debates on that. We're not going to talk about that right now. It's a whole other sermon because I don't need chairs flying across. Well, I like Pokemon. I don't like Pokemon. We're not doing that right now, all right? But point of the matter is, my dad took a stand based on what he knew, based on what he felt God was telling him. He said, I'm building these walls around my family. I'm building these spiritual walls around my family because I feel like that's what God has called us to. Let me tell you another way that my dad was a rebel, right? Was back when the oldest of us was around 2 or 3 years old, my dad and my mom decided they were going to homeschool us. And those of you, I know that when 2020 hit, when COVID hit, everybody was homeschooled. It was normalized, right? I think Liberty University is one of the many schools that even offer homeschooling packets, right? Like, and I don't mean physical packets. I mean, like, they'll send you stuff online. You log in, you can talk to teachers and whatnot, but most of your work is in a module online, right? It's so cool. Let me tell you, 25 years ago, homeschooling was not cool. In fact, if you were homeschooling 25 years ago, you were weird. It was weird. Look, it was not cool. It was weird. And look, if you were homeschooling 25 years ago, I'm sorry if I offended you, but you know I'm telling the truth. Homeschool families are weird. It's just different, y'all. And according to the world around us, the only reasons to homeschool is because you're too weird to fit in with the rest of society, or you just want to be a rebel, right? Everyone looks at the homeschoolers as your family just wants to be rebels, right? I want to take control of my kids' education. I don't trust the government, and your foil hat is on, right? That's what everybody's convinced of. They were convinced that every homeschooler was either too weird or just trying to be a rebel. You better believe between the Pokemon arguments and the homeschooling decisions and things like that, there were family members, there were friends, there were people that were just like, y'all just doing too much. Y'all just extra. Y'all just trying to be rebels. Y'all just trying to kick up dust, right? And it wasn't any of that for our family. My dad and mom simply decided this is what I feel like God has called our family to. Maybe he didn't call your family to this. Notice God didn't call everybody to lead in building the wall. He called Nehemiah to it. So there are some things that God's going to call you to, and as you're stepping into that identity that is God-given and God-confirmed, there will still be opposition. And people will call you a rebel, right? Nehemiah's called a rebel when he's just talking about building the wall, right? Remember, they're just talking about building the wall. He has just surveyed the wall, figured out where the weak spots are, and he's talking to the crew about how they're going to fix it. He's just talking. And then here comes Sanballat, Tobiah, and Gershom, and they begin ridiculing and mocking. We're just talking about building the wall at this point, and they're being called rebels. All right? Let's go to chapter 4. Now we're going to bounce a little bit. We're going to be in chapters 2, chapter 4, and chapter 6, okay? You're going to hear those three names mentioned over and over again, and similar problems, opposition to building the wall. Tobiah, Sanballat, and Gershom. Those are the ones you're going to hear over and over. So let's go ahead and flip over to chapter 4. So in chapter 2, we were talking about building the wall. Chapter 4 here, we're in the process of building the wall. You see the header there says, opposition to the rebuilding. And again, you can guess what names we're about to read were the opposition. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Look, y'all, he's going in on this squad. They're in the middle of trying to build this wall, getting things together, and this guy shows up and he starts just popping off, right? He's got so much to say. And then it says in chapter 3, Tobiah chimes in, right? Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls. Look, anybody ever heard of a roast session? Anybody ever heard of that, where you just kind of you hurl insults in a funny way at someone? It's supposed to be loving, but a lot of times it turns into not so fun and loving, right? That's what's happening here. Here's Nehemiah. They're in the process of building this wall. They're no longer just talking about it. They're in the building process, and here comes these guys, Sanballat and Tobiah. We didn't read about Gershon right yet, but those three usually ran together. Here they come in the process of building the wall, and they start mocking and ridiculing, right? Tobiah chimes in, and he says, what even is this, man? You're calling it a wall? It's not a wall. It's so weak. It's so brittle that even if a little fox were to climb up on it, it would come crumbling down, right? They're there in the process of building. Anybody ever seen a construction site? Anybody ever seen it? Yeah. If you take note at a construction site, you don't have to look for very long to see that it looks messy. That it looks a little bit messy, right? You might see the structure, the skeleton of a building, a couple of beams here and there. You might see a pile of garbage from what maybe was torn down. You might see a pile of supplies that we might need to go to in order to construct this new building, but it's messy. To the person that doesn't know what's going on, it's messy. Family. When you decide to step into the identity that God has called you to walk in, it's going to be messy. Because you're not perfect. You are not a perfect human being. Therefore, there will be times that you make mistakes. There will be times that things don't go quite the way you planned it. And can I tell you, the world as onlookers will look at that and call you a failure. They will look at you and they will label you a failure because the walls that you have been called by God to build up, it's messy right now. It's not complete yet, right? They don't know that the family that you prayed for, the family that you said, I'm going to build these walls. I want my children to grow up in knowledge of the knowing and way of Jesus Christ, in a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then they see that kid when they turn 13, 14, 15, start to make some stupid decisions, and they look at you and say, you failed. See, I knew it. All that time you spent saying, my kid's not going to watch this, and my kid's not going to go here and do that. And now look at your kid, right? They don't know that you're still at home praying over that child and God's still working in the life of that child. They don't know that the ministry opportunity that God called you to that maybe hasn't quite come to fruition the way you think it should or the way God has planned, because it's still in the process. It's still messy. It's not completed yet. But the world will look at you and call you a failure. And if you're not careful, you will accept that label. You'll look and you'll say, man, I guess I am a failure because I said that God called me to build this wall, but look at this mess. Man, Tobiah's right. If a fox just climbed on the wall, the whole thing would come tumbling down. I guess I really am a failure. No, that's not true. When you are walking in the identity that God has called you into, sometimes it gets messy. Sometimes it gets messy, and the world will try to label you a failure if you let them. Let's jump over to chapter 6. So we've covered when he is talking about building the wall in chapter 2. In chapter 4, he's in the process of building the wall, and it's a little bit messy. Now we're going to jump to chapter 6, okay? At this point, he's just about done building the wall. Only thing that's left to do is put the doors on the gates. That's all that's left. Chapter 6, verse 1. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it. Pause right there for just a moment. I love that he said that not a gap was left in it. It's almost as if he's like, look, y'all were on my back when I was talking about building the wall. When it was a messy process and we were in the middle of building it, y'all came and y'all had something to say. And he's like, now the wall's done, and thanks be to God, through the power of God, God did that thing. Not a gap is left in it. He's like, the wall is good. All that's left to do is put the doors on the gates, which he says here. Though up to that time I had not set the doors in the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply: I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Then, the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, it is reported among the nations and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now, this report will get back to the king, so come let us meet together. Y'all get what's happening here? They were against Nehemiah when he was talking about building the wall. They were against Nehemiah while he was in the messy process of building the wall. Now the wall is complete and they are threatening his life. They are trying to get him trying to lull him out from his work and say, let's go meet in one of these little villages. But thanks be to God, Nehemiah is smart enough to know something doesn't quite add up here. So he stays and continues to do the work of God rather than get distracted. There's a whole other sermon in that right there. But he says, why should the work stop just so that I can go down to you? So he stays there. And then they send a letter saying, look, we're going to start this rumor and send it to the king that the only reason why you have started building these walls is because you're planning to become a king. You're planning to revolt against the king, and you've built these walls to fortify your own kingdom. You've set up prophets. You've set up your own government. You've done all this not for the sake of your God, not for the sake of your people, but for the sake of yourself. You want to be a king. Look, family, when you are walking into the identity that God has called you into, they will label you a bad person. They will call you a rebel. They will call you a failure when it's messy. And then when God has elevated you to places, when God has taken you to new heights, they will call you a troublemaker. They will call you a troublemaker. They will say, you know what? All of this that you have done was not for God, was not for the love of people. It was for yourself. You have done this to set yourself up as a king. You think you're better than us. When God is taking you places and doing things with you, people will get jealous. People will get angry, right? And stop and ask yourself this question. What does it have to do with any of them? Geshem, Tobiah, and Sanballat has nothing to do with them, right? They've been there for most of the ride watching Nehemiah as he's building this wall, as he's instructing the crew who's building the wall, as he's loving on these people. And who knows the reasons why the 3 of them were as jealous as they were. Maybe it's because they had said no to God some other places in their lives. Maybe it's, you get where I'm going with this? Who knows why people are going to be against you? Who knows why people are going to be upset with you? But I will give you a shocking truth. When you are trying to please God, you will not please man. There will be people who are upset with you, who are willing to spread rumors about you. Here they are threatening his life and saying you're nothing more than a troublemaker. You've done all of this just to set yourself up as king. Y'all, Nehemiah can't catch a break. Nehemiah cannot catch a break. And here's the truth, neither can you. Neither can you. Because when you say yes to God, the enemy will keep hitting and hitting and hitting. So the question is, how on earth are we to deal with this? How on earth are we supposed to handle it when we finally say yes to taking God up at his word and saying yes to the identity that God has set in me? God has called me this. And no matter what the world tries to say, I know that God has confirmed this. How do we deal with that? Let's jump back to chapter 2. We're going to see how Nehemiah responded in each one of these situations. So in chapter 2, when they were calling him a rebel, in verse 19, when they were asking him, you did all this just to rebel against the king, didn't you? In verse 20, I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. When you say yes to God and the identity that he has placed on your life, the world will label you a bad person because you're doing things differently than them. The world will try to label you a bad person, but God has called you a great leader. The world wants to call you a bad person, but God has called you a great leader. Some of you are saying, well, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to be a church planner. I don't want to be a small group leader. I don't want to. Look, all of you are leaders in some capacity. You are further along than someone else, and someone is looking up to you. Therefore, it's your responsibility to be a great leader. So let's dive into some of Nehemiah's responses to figure out what it takes to say yes to the I am, to the identity of being a great leader. So Nehemiah's response in chapter 2, verse 20, I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. Notice, they're calling him a rebel. They're calling him a rebel. A rebel is someone who has a problem with authority and therefore fights. They are fighting in their own authority against the authority of the authority. Did I say authority enough times for you? That's the definition of a rebel, all right? Here, he responds with, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants. Look, when the world wants to label you a rebel, you need to lead with God's authority. You need to lead with God's authority. He starts off by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. This is him saying, I'm not coming under my own authority, right? I'm coming under the authority of the God of heaven. I'm not doing this to set up my own authority or to try to fight anybody else. Look, y'all, he could have sat there and he could have gone back and forth. He could have said, I got permission from the king. I got the paperwork. I got this. I got that. Sometimes we spend way too much time arguing back and forth with people, trying to prove your point, trying to prove why you're called or qualified. I studied the Bible this many years, and I went to this seminary, and I this, and God called me in this. It doesn't take all that. Nehemiah said, the God of heaven, drop the mic. That's it. I operate under the authority of the God of heaven. It's not my own authority. I'm not doing this for me. I operate under the authority of the God of heaven. Then he goes on to say, we, his servants. Servants. I have no problem with authority. I am nothing more than a servant. This isn't about me. See, when the world tries to label you a rebel, you need to lead with God's authority. It's not under my own authority like a rebel would be doing. It's under God's authority. Let's keep going. Chapter 4. Chapter 4, when they're in the messy process of building the wall, right? And they come and they start the roast session and they're talking about them and they're saying even a fox climbing on this wall would make it all crumble down. This is how he responds. Chapter 4, verse 4. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Notice he's praying. In this moment where they have labeled him a failure because of the messy process of building the wall, he doesn't even respond to them right away. He talks to God. He prays. He says, hear us, our God, for we are despised. When the world tries to label you a failure, you need to lead with God's power. You need to lead with God's power. Notice that he didn't respond in his own power. He didn't respond to them at all in this moment. He responds with God. He responds by talking to God. The only way you will be able to lead with God's power is to have a strong prayer life. You need to have a strong prayer life in the times when you're at home by yourself, doing your own thing, yes, but also in that moment. We teach our children when they're upset to take a breath, to count to 10. Can I teach you something? In the moments where you're facing opposition, take a moment and pray to God. Take a moment and actually pray to God. That's the only way you'll be able to lead with God's power. He says, hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. All these things that he's praying, all these things that he's talking about, he could have tried to do that in his own power. This is what we don't understand. These guys, Tobiah, Geshem, and Sanballat, they're standing there and they've got some people with them, but Nehemiah's standing there and he's got a whole crew of workers with him who all have hammers and spikes and bricks and everything else, right? He could have said, in my own power, let's go to war. Let's fight, right? But he doesn't. He prays to the God of the universe who actually has the power. If you are going to lead in God's way, you need to lead with his power. When the world tries to label you a failure, don't take it personally. Jesus told the disciples, the world will hate you, but remember, they hated me first. Remember that it's going to happen. Jesus told the disciples on another account, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves, right? It's going to happen. People are going to come against you. They're going to label you a failure because of the messy process sometimes. When that happens, lead in God's power, not your own. Let's keep reading. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. When the wall was completed, when the wall was 99.9% done, and they are jealous at this point. They are angry. They begin threatening his life. They begin saying, we're going to spread rumors about you, that you've done all this just to become your own little kingdom, right? When that happens, let's read how he responds. The world labeled him a troublemaker, right? This is how he responds in chapter 6, verse 8. I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you were saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. I love that answer. He's like, bro, you're just making all this up. Verse 9. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too tired or will get too weak for the work, and it will not get completed. Right here. But I prayed. Now strengthen my hands. In this moment where they were labeling him a troublemaker, you just want to be your own little king. You didn't do this for God. You didn't do this for your people. You did this just to exalt yourself. They called him a troublemaker. He was leading with God's integrity the way he prayed. It's another instance where he prays, right? But I want you to take note of how he prays. He says, they were trying to scare us. They were trying to frighten us so that our hands would get so weak that we couldn't do the work, right? This is what he's saying. Nehemiah is giving y'all a clue. When the enemy is attacking your character, your intention, your identity, it's a shakedown. He's trying to get in your head. The enemy's trying to shake you down, trying to get you to a place where you start to believe these things about yourself. Why? So that you get too weak and too weary that the work doesn't get done. So I want you to take note of how Nehemiah prayed. He said, strengthen my hands. Strengthen my hands. Why did he pray that? So that the work could continue. Y'all, if we were to translate that prayer for you today, that might be, Lord, strengthen my heart. Lord, give me more patience. Lord, give me more stamina. Give me more longevity. Give me more whatever. Give me more peace. Lord, give me what I need to get the work done that you've called me to. That's what Nehemiah is praying.
Hey y'all, thanks for checking out another sermon from the New Life family. Here at New Life, we exist to love God and love people. If you want to join us in person in La Plata, our services are Sundays at 9, 10:30, and noon. If you're looking to take a next step of faith or have any questions for the team, click the link in the description and fill out the Connect card. We'll see y'all next time.